I came to a point in my life where I hit rock bottom in the area of relationships. I will never forget the night that Brandon called and broke up with me. Eric doesn't like Brandon. Brandon was a guy that I dated in high school. Tall, athletic, popular, good-looking. I bet, yeah, he doesn't want me to go on and on, but this is a necessary part of my story. I had gone out with other guys in high school, but no one that made me feel as loved and as secure as Brandon did. He told me every day that he loved me and that he thought I was beautiful. And he was sensitive to me. Whenever we were at a party or someplace where I didn't know people, he would always have his arm around me or be holding my hand. I felt comfortable around him. I could share my desires, my dreams, my fears. And as the weeks went by, I began to feel like I need the security that having him in my life brings. Everything was perfect for a while. He only had eyes for me. But pretty soon, I started realizing that he was beginning to notice other girls and losing interest in me. And I felt so desperate to cling to this relationship. I didn't think I could live without it. So I told myself it didn't matter what it took, I was going to make him want to stay with me. And I started compromising in the area of physical purity. See, I had grown up in a Christian home, and from a young age, I had been taught what I like to refer to as the Christian dating philosophy. I knew that as a Christian, I was not supposed to have sex before marriage, and I knew that I was supposed to look for guys that had good morals and went to church and believed the same things that I did. I went to a lot of abstinence campaigns and a lot of youth pastor purity pep rallies, and I was very well versed on the way that I was supposed to go about this dating thing as a Christian. But sometimes it seemed to me that all the well-meaning Christian adults in my life that were saying, save sex for marriage, did not understand the reality of the world that I lived in. Sexual temptation was not something that just lurked behind a dark corner somewhere. Sexual temptation and perversion was everywhere in my face, every moment of every day. The first time I was asked to have sex, I was 13 years old. And some of my friends were sexually active by that age. In our parents' generation, sex was a pretty big deal. In our generation, it's just become the equivalent of a goodnight kiss on a first or a second date. It was just something that was naturally expected out of any dating relationship that I saw. I knew couples at school that would go to their cars and have sex during the school day. I knew girls that would go to parties and let guys take turns having sex with them. This did not shock me at the time, but it was just the reality of the world that I lived in, and it's probably the world that most of you live in too. It's our culture today. And to be physically pure in a culture like this can seem nearly impossible. I really tried, though. I tried to take the Christian dating philosophy into this world and make it work, because I wanted to please God. I wanted to do this the right way. And for a while, I did pretty well. I went out with guys that had good morals and went to church and weren't obsessed with finding a girl that would sleep with them on the first or second date. And I made it clear that I was saving sex for marriage. But when I started going out with Brandon, things changed a little bit. I told him in the beginning of our relationship that I was committed to saving sex for marriage, and he had been completely supportive and understanding. But as the weeks went by, I began to realize he really wanted more from me physically than I was willing to give. When I became emotionally attached to him, I wanted to hold on to that relationship. And when I could feel that relationship start to fade, I wanted to do whatever it took to hold on to him. So piece by piece, I began to give more and more of myself to him physically in the hopes that he would want to stay in this relationship. I justified what I was doing by looking at purity as this line in the sand that I was trying not to cross. As long as I was technically not having sex and crossing that line, I told myself it was okay to do pretty much everything up to that point, and that I was still hanging on to my purity. But the more I did this, the more deep inside I knew better. I didn't feel pure. I felt dirty and used and guilty. I wasn't very close to my family at this time in my life because my friends and my dating life consumed me. So I didn't go to my parents and talk about this. I didn't talk about it with my friends. The only time the issue ever really got addressed in my life was when I went to church and someone brought up the question, how far is too far? Everyone wanted to know the answer to that. How far to that line in the sand? How close can I get to that line before it's really sin? How close to the edge of the cliff can I get before I fall off? How much can I get away with? One of the first times I heard a youth pastor answer that question, I was probably 14. And he said, you know, physical boundaries are different for everyone. What's right for you may not be right for someone else. You know, just go to the point where you feel comfortable and make sure you stop before things get out of control. Well, that was all I needed to hear to justify everything that I was doing. And I was sure I could stop before things got out of control with Brandon. So I kept getting closer and closer to that line. Even though I compromised and gave more and more of myself to him, it did not save our relationship. And after about 8 months, he called and said that he wanted to start seeing other people. That was seriously one of the darkest moments of my life. It felt like someone had taken my heart and my emotions and ripped them out and shattered them all over the ground into a million pieces. I was devastated. I had built my world around this relationship. I had poured my life into this guy. And now that it was over, I didn't know who I was anymore. Losing him left this huge, hollow void in my life that needed to be filled with something. I was so lonely and insecure. I started going out with guys after that, even if I didn't like them, just to have someone in my life. I had poured so much of myself into Brandon, mentally, emotionally, and physically, that it was very easy to do that in all these other relationships. I would give so much of myself away, and sometimes they didn't even last for more than a few weeks. I had friends and I had a social life during this time, but my emotional state revolved around my dating life. Whenever a relationship began, I was on top of the world. I felt great. But whenever a relationship ended, it didn't matter if it was a long-term thing or just a 2-week little fling. I felt that same hollow devastation, like someone had just taken my emotions and ripped them out, shattered them all over the ground into a million pieces. Ironically, on the outside, I was still following this Christian dating philosophy. I hadn't technically crossed that line in the sand. I was still a virgin. And I was still going out with guys that had good morals and went to church. On the outside, it looked like I was doing everything right, but on the inside, I was an emotional wreck. And that was right about the point that I hit rock bottom. I was laying on my bed one night, sobbing my eyes out because another relationship had just ended. And I cried out to God, what am I doing wrong? You know, I'm following this Christian dating philosophy. I'm doing so much better than most of my friends who are sleeping with any guy that looks at them. You know, I'm dating, you know, pretty good Christian guys. I'm not having sex. And why do I feel like I've already been through the pain and the trauma of 5 or 6 divorces at this age? To tell you the truth, I didn't really expect God to answer that question, because for the past few years, I had put him on the back burner of my life. He wasn't my top priority. My friends and my dating life consumed me. I gave God 10 minutes of my day, and I went to church, but that was pretty much it. And yet, somehow, even though I'd been pushing God away, he got through to me that night, and he did begin speaking to me. It wasn't in an audible voice, but if I could have translated that moment into a conversation between me and God, it would have sounded something like this. Leslie, do you believe that there's a special guy out there that you'll spend the rest of your life with someday? My answer to that was yes, of course I believe that. I was still holding out for my mix between Ken and Prince Charming, and I knew we would meet when I was in my 20s and life was kind of not fun anymore, and you know, we'd ride off into the sunset and live happily ever after. So my answer to that question was, oh, of course I believe there's a guy out there that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. The next question sent my mind spinning. Leslie, do you also believe that I'm the God of all creation? I know you better than you know yourself, and I am perfectly capable of bringing this man into your life in my own time, in my own way, and I don't need your help. What? God, wait, let's talk about this here. You don't need my help? Yes, you do. Okay, no offense, God, I'm young, and you are like really old. Okay, there is no possible way. I mean, you don't even know like what's cool, so I'm sorry, but you're going to pick some total... Okay, never mind. I won't even go there. I could not even conceive of giving God control of this area of my life. How could he know what my needs, my wants, and my desires were? I was sure that if I gave God control of this area of my life, he was out to destroy me. I knew it was going to happen, too. I had it all figured out. Because God's purpose in life was to make me miserable. So I was going to be spending, if I gave God control of relationships with the opposite sex and let him, you know, take this area of my life, I would be doomed to sit for the rest of my life in a rocking chair, in a long gray dress, staring out the window with my eyes glazed over and drool running down the side of my face. And I would have no friends, no phone calls, no dating life whatsoever. I'd just be rocking my life away. And then I'd get married when I was 95 to some guy I couldn't stand. We'd have 2 miserable years together and then die. That was God's idea of romance. I wanted nothing to do with it. But God was so patient and gentle with me. And over the next few weeks, he kept gently stirring my heart. And I realized that he didn't want to make my life miserable, but that he cared about every detail of this area of my life. He truly wanted to be in the center of my love life, and he had an amazing plan. He didn't just want to be in the center of this area of my life. He wanted to be in the center of every area of my life as well, not just 10 minutes of my day. When I realized how much God cared for me and wanted to be the center of my life, everything changed. One day, I knelt down by my bed, and I gave God control of every area of my life. I made a decision to put him first, even if it meant losing friends, losing popularity, or looking foolish to the rest of this world. And after I made that decision, I finally had peace again, because I knew that God was in his rightful place in my life. The hardest area to give to him that day when I made those decisions was relationships with the opposite sex. I felt him give me a promise that if I could trust him, he had a plan for me that was so far beyond anything that I could plan for myself. It was hard for me to believe that he cared that much or that he would be that faithful. I had never been taught this in church, that God was the author of love and romance, and that he had a beautiful plan for this area of my life. I had been writing my own story and putting a Christian label on it, and now God was tapping me on the shoulder and asking me to give him the pen of my life and let him write every detail of my love story. I cannot imagine what my life would have been like if I had continued to write my own story. His plans for me were so far beyond anything I could have dreamed for myself. As Christians, we can hold God at arm's length and write our own story, maybe even follow a Christian dating philosophy. But God wants more than that. He wants total control of every area of our life. If we give him the pen and invite him in to his rightful place as the Lord of our life, that's when we'll discover his very best for us.